I ignored it longer than I should have, mostly because I didn't want to turn into that husband. The paranoid one. The guy who notices one little change and suddenly starts acting like every late text or schedule change is proof of an affair. I didn't want to be bitter, suspicious, or pathetic. I thought being calm meant being mature. I thought trust was what decent husbands were supposed to offer. That's the part I still hate admitting. Not even the cheating itself. It's that I kept handing my wife excuses because I thought that was what good men did. I thought staying reasonable made me the adult in the room. Really, it just made me easier to work around. My wife Leah and I had been married 9 years. We had a 7-year-old daughter, Nora. We had a house, routines, school pickup schedules, a joint account, and one of those marriages people call stable because nothing dramatic ever happens in public. I handled most of the bills. Leah worked at a private clinic across town. Life wasn't exciting, but it was normal. Back then, if you had asked me how we were doing, I would have said we were fine. Maybe tired, maybe a little boring, maybe too deep into work, errands, and parenting to feel especially connected. But fine. The first change was small. Leah started taking Uber to work. At first, it didn't sound strange. She said the clinic parking lot was a nightmare because of construction. Then she said it was easier on days she knew she'd be staying late. Then it became a few times a week, then most days. The problem was, she had a perfectly good car. So when I asked why we were suddenly spending that much on rides, she always had an answer ready. Parking, traffic, headache, bad day. Didn't feel like driving. Was too tired after work. Every answer made sense by itself. That was the problem. Nothing looked crazy on its own. It was only when they started stacking up that I felt that little shift in my gut. Then she started mentioning one driver by name. Marcos was early again. I got that same driver. Marcos said traffic near the clinic gets backed up around 5. At first, I barely reacted. Same area, same time of day, same city. Maybe she really did keep getting the same guy. But after a while, it stopped sounding casual. It started sounding familiar. Not just, I got the same driver again, but like he had quietly become part of her routine. One night, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs. I didn't pick it up. I didn't unlock it. The screen was just face up, and my eyes went there automatically. It was an Uber receipt, and there was his name again. Marcos. When she came back down, I asked, "You get the same guy a lot, huh?" She dried her hands on a towel and said, "Sometimes." "Enough that you know his schedule?" She gave me this tired, annoyed look. "It's not that deep, Dan." Maybe it wasn't. That was how all the early signs worked. Each thing was just small enough to explain away. And because I didn't want to look insecure, I kept letting them go. After that, though, I noticed more. She kept her phone closer, started turning it face down on the table. If I asked something simple like why she was still taking Uber on weekends when the parking excuse obviously didn't apply, she got defensive fast. Not every time. That would have been too obvious. Just enough that I started feeling like every normal question I asked somehow made me the unreasonable one. Then I found the transfers. I was going through our bank account one Sunday morning because that was usually my job. Mortgage, utilities, school stuff, groceries, the usual. And I saw 4 transfers over a few weeks that didn't fit anything we normally paid. 140, 175, 120, 165. Not huge amounts, but enough to matter. I asked Leah about them. She looked at the screen, then at me, and said, "That was for Maya. Maya is her younger sister. It was believable on paper because Maya was always in some kind of financial mess. Late rent, utility shut-off notices, bad breakup, job issue. There was always something. For what? I asked. Rent. She was short. I didn't want to make it a whole thing. I remember nodding because it sounded possible. That's how so much of it worked. Things sounded possible. A few days later, I saw Maya at Nora's swim lesson. I wasn't trying to catch anybody in a lie. I just made conversation. "Hope things got sorted out," I said. She frowned. "What things?" I should have dropped it, but I didn't. "Leah said you were short on rent." Maya didn't answer right away. She looked down at the pool, then back at me, and in that second, I knew something was off. "Oh, right. Yeah, that," she said. I paid her back. It was clumsy. Too clumsy. And that was the moment I stopped feeling vaguely uneasy and started feeling sick. That night, I didn't say anything to Leah. I just watched her move around the kitchen like everything was normal, helping Nora with homework, asking me if I wanted chicken or pasta the next night, smiling down at her phone at something she didn't show me. I remember feeling embarrassed more than angry, like I was already behind in my own life, and everybody else had the map. A few days later, I checked the old iPad. Years ago, we had linked it to Leah's account, so Nora could use it for apps, photos, and kid stuff. Most of Leah's messages didn't sync to it anymore. That was exactly why I checked. I wasn't expecting some movie-style full conversation. I was just hoping for anything that would either calm me down or confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I didn't find a whole thread. Just a leftover preview and part of another line that hadn't cleared properly. Same pickup as usual. Backlot, don't text when you're with him. I read it over and over until the words stopped feeling real. With him. That was me. Not husband. Not Dan. Not father of her child. Just the person they had to schedule around. I took a photo of the screen because my hands had started shaking. When Leah came home that night, I almost confronted her right there. I had the bank transfers, Maya acting weird, and now this. But I didn't. Not because I still thought she might be innocent. Because I knew once I said it out loud, everything was going to break, and I wanted one thing she couldn't explain away. So I checked our family location sharing. I didn't have some secret tracking app. We still had location sharing on through the family setup we used for school pickups, errands, and emergencies. Most of the time, nobody paid attention to it. But when I looked back at the recent stops, I saw the same apartment complex on the east side more than once. Not every day. That would have been easier, almost. But enough. Usually after work. Sometimes on days she said she was staying late. Once on a Saturday when she told me she was dropping off donations and grabbing coffee. I sat there staring at the screen feeling like an idiot. There it was. A pattern. Not one bad decision. Not one weird detour. A routine. The next day on my lunch break, I drove there. I nearly turned around twice. It was a tired-looking apartment complex with faded building numbers and little balconies full of broken patio chairs and dead plants. I sat in my truck feeling ridiculous. I kept telling myself maybe I had it wrong. Maybe she met a coworker there. Maybe somebody from the clinic lived there. Maybe I was about to blow up my marriage because I had let a few weird details turn me into exactly the kind of husband I never wanted to become. I waited longer than I planned to. Long enough that I started feeling ashamed for even being there. I knew roughly when her late clinic days usually ended, and I kept telling myself I'd leave in 5 more minutes. Then I saw her. She came out of one of the buildings, fixing her hair with one hand and holding her phone in the other. Not rushed. Not nervous. Comfortable. Like she'd done that walk before. A lot. A man came out behind her carrying her blue travel cup, the one our daughter had covered in sticker letters the summer before. He handed it to her and touched her lower back like it was the most normal thing in the world. That was when it became real in the ugliest possible way. Not a suspicion. Not a text. Not money on a screen. My wife walking out of another man's apartment looking at ease. I got out of the truck before I had fully decided to. Leah saw me first. I've never seen someone's face change that fast. It was like all the blood left at once. Dan. I just looked at her and said, "Seriously?" Then I looked at him. "This is it? This is what all the Uber crap was for?" The guy looked from her to me and took a step back. He already knew who I was. That part was obvious immediately. Leah started talking fast. "Okay, just don't do this here." That made me laugh, and even to my own ears I sounded half crazy. "Or here?" I said. "Outside his apartment? Where exactly would you prefer?" The guy said, "I think you should talk to your wife." I looked at him and said, "You don't get to tell me anything." Leah kept trying to lower the temperature without actually answering the question standing right in front of us. That made me angrier than if she had yelled. "Please just get in the car and let me explain." "How long?" I asked. She kept saying my name. "How long?" Her eyes filled up, but she still hesitated. Even then, she was trying to calculate the least damaging version. "Since June," she said. It was February. 8 months. I remember looking at her and then at him and thinking about all the normal things that had happened in those 8 months. Birthday dinner, Thanksgiving, Christmas shopping, my dad's surgery, school drop-offs, family photos, homework, random Tuesday nights on the couch, all of it sitting right next to this, and I hadn't known. I asked, "And the money?" "Dan, please. The transfers. Did you give him money?" The guy looked away. That was answer enough. Leah said, "I can explain." I said, "Get in your own car." "Actually, no, you don't really use that anymore, do you?" Cheap shot. I know. I didn't care. I got back in my truck and left because I didn't trust myself to stay there another minute. She called me over and over. Then the texts started. "Please come home. Please don't do anything rash. It's not what you think." Then, a little later, "Please think about Nora." That one made me so angry I had to throw my phone face down on the passenger seat. I called my sister Rachel because I couldn't think straight. I met her in a diner parking lot and told her the whole thing in pieces that didn't even come out in order. She listened, then asked the one question I hadn't let myself think all the way through. "Does Nora know this guy?" I didn't answer. Not because I had an answer, because I suddenly realized I didn't. And that thought hit harder than anything else had so far. When I got home, Nora was at my mom's. Leah had arranged that. She was waiting in the kitchen, crying on and off, but still trying to look composed, which somehow made everything worse. I didn't sit down. She started with, "I know how this looks." I said, "Don't do that." She wiped her face and tried again. It started as talking. Of course it did. She said it started with rides and small conversations. He asked about her day, remembered things, made her feel seen. She said she'd been tired for a long time, that she felt invisible, that every day felt exactly the same, and he made her feel interesting again. Then she said she never meant for it to become serious. I was so angry I actually felt calm. You planned enough to have a pickup routine and a backlot. She covered her face and cried harder. I asked about Maya. She admitted Maya knew. Not everything at first, then everything later. She said Maya told her to end it, like that somehow counted for anything. She still lied for you, I said. Leah just sat there. Then I asked about the money. That took longer. First she denied it. Then she said it only happened once. Then, eventually, the truth came out. She had helped him a few times when he was short on rent or behind on car expenses, because if he lost the car, he couldn't work. She said it like she was describing some sad, practical situation she had gotten dragged into. I just stared at her. We had been trying to budget better. We had talked about school costs, summer camp, and repairs around the house. I was paying the mortgage, groceries, and school stuff, while part of that same household money was helping keep her affair convenient. That hit me in a way I still don't fully know how to explain. It wasn't just cheating. It was me helping fund the system built around humiliating me. Then I asked the question I should have asked earlier. Has Nora been around him? Leah looked down immediately. I said, Answer me. She said, Just in the car a couple times. That felt like being punched. It turned out there had been days when Leah used him to pick them both up. Sometimes if school got out early or she didn't want to move things around, she'd say Mommy's driver friend Marcos was helping. Once they stopped for smoothies. Nothing happened to my daughter. I want to be clear about that. But the fact that she had brought our child into the orbit of this at all made something in me go cold. She hadn't kept the affair separate. She had made him familiar enough that my daughter knew his name. That was the point where it stopped feeling like private betrayal and started feeling like something built straight through the middle of my life. My money, my routines, my child, my trust. Everything useful got folded into it. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I'm glad I did, because I was still in that stage where half of me wanted answers and the other half wanted to burn the whole thing down emotionally. The lawyer told me not to move out, to document everything, and to stop having important conversations with Leah only face to face. Over the next week, Leah kept changing shape depending on the hour. Sometimes she cried and said she was ashamed. Sometimes she got defensive and said our marriage had been dead for years, which was interesting because she had never once said that before she got caught. Sometimes she said it was over with him. Sometimes she said she never meant to hurt me. A few times she acted almost offended, like I was being cruel for not wanting to sit down and have some calm, thoughtful discussion about why this had happened. That was probably the clearest picture of who she had become through all of this. Not some mastermind, not some tragic romantic, just selfish, messy, and desperate to control whichever version made her look least terrible in that exact moment. Maya called me a couple of days later, crying. She apologized, said she thought Leah would stop, said she only covered for the money because Leah was panicking and swore it was ending. I asked her, "How long did you know?" "Too long," she said. That answer was enough. I didn't tell a bunch of people. I didn't need a public circus, but the people who needed to know knew. My sister, my parents. Eventually, Leah's parents. Her mother started with that whole marriages are complicated tone until I told her I had the message preview, the account transfers, and the location pattern. After that, she got a lot quieter. Leah moved into her parents' house 2 weeks later. The divorce process was ugly in the boring way real divorces are ugly. Schedules, money, custody, the house. Lawyers turning heartbreak into numbered documents. There wasn't some dramatic courtroom speech. Mostly it was me sitting across from a woman I had loved for almost a decade, while strangers discussed our child and finances like case material. What mattered most to me legally was making sure one thing was on record. She had used marital money on him. Not because I thought that would heal anything. I just refused to let that detail get softened into mistakes were made. No, she made choices, repeated ones, and some of those choices came out of our account. The affair didn't last once it was out in the open. That part was almost insulting after everything it cost. For months I had pictured some huge, impossible connection, because you almost have to if someone is willing to blow up a family for it. You tell yourself it must have been powerful, rare, some giant thing you never stood a chance against. It wasn't. Once the secrecy was gone, there wasn't much left. No fantasy, no big love story. Just two selfish people who liked the version of themselves they got to be in a hidden space. I found out later they barely lasted a couple of months after everything came out. They started fighting almost immediately. Money, pressure, expectations, all the ordinary garbage that real life brings in. All that intense attention she thought meant something disappeared pretty fast when it had to survive in daylight instead of between pickup times and lies. That should have made me feel better than it did. Mostly, I just felt tired. The hardest conversations were with Nora. We didn't tell her the details. We told her mom and dad were having grown-up problems and were going to live in different houses. She cried and asked if it was because she had been bad at school that one day. That hurt more than catching Leah outside his apartment. Kids always look for a reason they can understand, and too often that means blaming themselves. So I put her in therapy. Eventually I went too. Not because I wanted to sit in a room and talk about feelings in a calm voice, but because I realized I was carrying this constant low-level rage and humiliation everywhere. I was distracted, short with people, barely sleeping, replaying details I didn't want, and then getting angry at myself for replaying them. Months later, after most of the legal stuff was done, Leah asked if we could talk somewhere neutral. No paperwork, no custody schedule, just talk. I almost said no, but I went. We met at a coffee shop. She looked worn out, not dramatically, just stripped down, like life had stopped cooperating with her. We talked about Nora first. Then there was a long silence. Finally, Leah said, "I know what this looks like now." I said, "You knew what it was then." She nodded, sat there for a second. Then she said something that was probably the closest she ever got to the full truth. She said she didn't really want to leave me when it started. She wanted the marriage, the house, Nora, all the stable parts. And she wanted the attention too. She wanted to feel chosen all the time. She said with him, everything was focused on her. Every ride, every text, every conversation. He was always on, always paying attention, always making her feel interesting. She thought that feeling meant something bigger than it did. I said, "So you didn't want a different life? You wanted two?" She looked down and said, "Yes." That was it. That was the cleanest truth I got. People assume the worst part of a story like this is the physical cheating. It wasn't. Not for me. The worst part was realizing how much of my life had been turned into support beams for their affair. My work schedule gave them timing. Our joint account gave them money. My trust gave them cover. My daughter got folded into the logistics. Her sister covered for the lies. And while all of that was happening, I was still doing what I thought husbands were supposed to do. Paying bills. Trusting my wife. Thinking we were just in a tired phase. That's the part that stayed with me. Not that she cheated. It's that she reduced me to the obstacle, the guy in the way. The him in a message. Same pickup as usual? Backlot. Don't text when you're with him. For months, that was my place in my own marriage. Him. The person to work around. I'm not him anymore. But I don't think I'll ever completely forget what it felt like to find out I had been.